She had never been the kind of person who demanded attention. In fact, for most of her career, people had looked right past her. Her name was Clara Mbeki, and she worked in a mid-level office of a large international aid organization based in Nairobi, Kenya. To her colleagues, Clara was the quiet one. She kept to herself, showed up on time, did her work, and went home. She didn't go to after-work drinks. She didn't post inspirational quotes on LinkedIn. She didn't volunteer for the flashy projects that got written up in the annual report. Instead, Clara worked on data. Boring, endless, thankless data. Spreadsheets of food distribution numbers, logs of medical supply deliveries, and reports on water sanitation projects in remote villages. Everyone thought she was just a clerk. A glorified file clerk, at best. The truth, however, was that Clara saw things others missed. While her managers celebrated the big funding announcements and the photo opportunities with local politicians, Clara sat in her tiny cubicle and noticed the patterns. She noticed that every time a certain road was used for truck deliveries, the number of broken water pumps went up. She noticed that when a specific supplier provided medicine, the expiration dates were always suspiciously close. She wrote these observations in careful, detailed memos. She sent them up the chain of command. And every single time, her memos were ignored. A few times, her boss, a man named Mr. Otieno, even laughed at her. "Clara," he would say, shaking his head, "you worrying too much. That's not your job. Just stick to the numbers." So she did. For years, she stuck to the numbers while the organization made the same mistakes over and over. They wrote her off as ineffective. Some called her the ghost because she was there, but never seemed to matter. But Clara did not waste her time feeling sorry for herself. Instead, she used her quiet hours to learn. She enrolled in an online course about logistics in crisis zones. She studied satellite imagery and learned how to predict where the next food shortage might happen based on weather patterns and market prices. She also started training her body. She had always been a thin, unassuming woman, but she began waking up at 4 a.m. to run. Then she added strength training. Then she added self-defense classes. No one at work knew about any of this. To them, she was still just the quiet data clerk who never spoke up in meetings. She liked it that way. The less they saw, the more she could prepare. The breaking point came during a routine project. The organization had received a large grant to deliver emergency food supplies to a conflict zone in the northern region. The plan was rushed. The timeline was impossible. And Clara, as usual, was asked to just handle the paperwork, but when she looked at the proposed delivery route, her heart sank. She recognized the area from her satellite studies. The rainy season was starting early this year. A river that was usually dry would soon flood, and the main bridge on the proposed route had been marked as unstable in a government report from 6 months ago. No one had bothered to check. She wrote a memo. She titled it, "Urgent, Flood Risk and Bridge Instability on Northern Delivery Route." She sent it to Mr. Otieno. He called her into his office and closed the door. "Clara," he said, not unkindly, "I appreciate your attention to detail. But the donors want this delivery done by the end of the month. We don't have time for new routes. Just process the way bills," Clara tried to explain. She showed him the satellite images she had printed out. She showed him the weather data. She even showed him the government report about the bridge. Mr. Otieno barely glanced at the papers. He smiled the way adults smile at children who have said something cute but irrelevant. "That's very thorough, Clara, but the decision has been made. Please, just do your job." She did her job. She processed the waybills, but she also kept a private folder. She documented every warning she had given. She saved every email. She printed out every memo. And then she waited. The trucks left on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, the first reports came back. The bridge had collapsed. 3 trucks had fallen into the river. 2 drivers were dead. The rest of the convoy was stranded on the wrong side of the floodwaters with no way to reach the villages. The food supplies were ruined. The organization panicked. There was an emergency meeting. Mr. Otieno stood in front of the regional director and said, "We had no warning." This was a complete surprise. Clara was not in that meeting. She was at her desk, calmly organizing her private folder. When the internal investigation began, Clara walked into the director's office and placed the folder on the desk. "Here are the warnings," she said. "All of them. Sent on these dates." acknowledged by Mr. Otieno each time. The director was stunned. He read through the documents in silence. Then he looked at Clara as if seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" he asked. Clara shrugged. "I did, 3 times. You were in meetings. Your assistant said to send it to my chain of command." The director had no answer. Mr. Otieno was put on leave. The organization issued a public apology. But none of that brought back the 2 drivers. And none of that changed how people saw Clara. To them, she was still just the quiet data clerk who had been right once. They did not know about the 4 a.m. runs. They did not know about the self-defense classes. They did not know about the online logistics course. They did not know that Clara was no longer just watching. She was training. She was waiting. And she was about to receive a phone call that would change everything. That phone call came on a Thursday afternoon. Clara was not in the office. She had taken a half day to go to a shooting range outside the city. Yes, shooting. She had been practicing for months, not because she liked violence, but because she had learned that in the most dangerous places in the world, the ability to defend yourself was not optional. She was squeezing the trigger, focused on her breathing, when her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, she looked. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. But the area code was from the capital, and the prefix was one she knew well. It was the presidential prefix. She answered, her heart pounding not from the gun, but from the name on the screen. "Ms. Becky." A voice said, "This is the office of the president. Please hold." Clara held. The line clicked and crackled. Then a new voice came on, deep, calm, tired, even. "Clara Becky. This is President Joseph Odongo." Clara almost dropped the phone. She had never spoken to anyone above the level of a regional director. Now the president of the country was on her phone. She managed to say, "Yes, sir. This is Clara." The president did not waste time on pleasantries. "I read your memos," he said. "All of them. The ones your organization tried to bury. You saw the bridge problem before anyone else. You saw the supplier fraud. You saw the patterns. My advisors have been watching you for 3 months. We know about your training, the running, the self-defense, the satellite work. We know you're not just a clerk." Clara stood very still at the edge of the shooting range. The sun was hot. Sweat dripped down her back. She could smell gunpowder on her hands. "What do you want from me, sir?" she asked. The president paused. Then he said something that would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. "I want you to stop writing memos that get ignored. I want you to come work for me, directly. There's a crisis in the eastern provinces. Rebel groups, food blockades, and a corrupt supply chain. My people on the ground keep dying because the information doesn't reach me in time. I need someone who sees what others miss. I need someone who trains while everyone else sleeps. I need you, Clara, not your boss, not your organization. You." Clara looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She thought about all the years of being invisible, all the memos that were laughed at, all the times she was told to just do her job. She thought about the 2 drivers who died because no one listened. And she thought about the training, the early mornings, the sore muscles, the quiet determination that no one at the office ever saw. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll come." The president gave her an address and a time. Then he hung up. Clara stood there for a long moment. Then she packed her bag, walked to her car, and drove home. She did not tell anyone at work. They would find out soon enough. And when they did, they would finally understand the woman they had written off as ineffective was just getting started. The first thing Clara Becky noticed when she walked into the presidential briefing room was how quiet it was. Not the quiet of a library or a church, but the heavy, tense quiet of men who were used to being the smartest people in the room and had just realized they might not be. There were 8 of them. Generals, intelligence chiefs, senior advisors, and a woman named Mrs. Fatima Diallo, who ran the president's crisis response unit. They all looked at Clara as she entered. She was wearing simple clothes, dark trousers, a button-down shirt, and sturdy boots. No uniform, no rank, no title. Just a thin woman with tired eyes and a calm expression. One of the generals, a large man named General Capruto, actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly, but the laugh of someone who had been told to take orders from a data clerk and could not believe it. "This is her. The general said to the president. "This is your secret weapon?" President Odongo did not laugh. He gestured to a chair at the table. "Sit down, Clara. We have a problem." The problem, as Clara quickly learned, was the eastern province of Kalo. For 6 months, a rebel group called the Eastern Freedom Alliance had been blockading the main roads into the provincial capital, a town called Gaeta. The rebels were not interested in taking over the country. They were interested in one thing: control of the food supply. They had figured out that if they stopped the trucks, they could starve the people into submission. The government had tried everything. Airdrops, but the rebels shot down to helicopters. Negotiations, but the rebel leader refused to talk. Military convoys, but the roads were mined. 3 convoys had been hit in the last 2 months. 40 soldiers dead. 100 wounded. And in Gaeta, people were beginning to eat leaves and bark. The president looked tired. Dark circles under his eyes. His voice was hoarse from too many meetings and too little sleep. "I brought Clara here because she sees patterns," he said to the room. She predicted the bridge collapse that killed 2 drivers. She identified a supplier fraud that cost this government $3 million. And she did all of that while being ignored. Imagine what she can do when we actually listen. General Caputo snorted. "With respect, sir, this is not a spreadsheet problem. This is a war. People are shooting at us. We need soldiers, not analysts." Clara said nothing. She just listened. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and started writing. The general noticed and frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked. Clara looked up. "I'm writing down everything you've tried that didn't work. It's a shorter list than the things you haven't tried." "That's useful." The room went quiet again. Mrs. Diallo, the crisis response chief, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" she asked. Clara flipped through her notebook. She had done her homework before coming. She had spent the entire night before studying every report, every map, every intelligence brief she could find. "You've tried force," she said. "You've tried negotiations. You've tried air power. You've tried everything that involves fighting the rebels directly. But you haven't tried the one thing that actually matters, the food itself." She stood up and walked to the large map on the wall. It showed Kalo province, with Gaeta marked in red. The roads were crossed out in black ink where mines had been found. The rivers were marked in blue. "The rebels control the roads," Clara said, tracing her finger along the map. "But they don't control the rivers. There are 3 rivers that flow into Gaeta from the north. The water is shallow right now because it's the dry season. Too shallow for boats. But in 3 weeks, the rains will start. The rivers will rise. And when they do, you can move food on barges. Not trucks, barges." General Caputo stood up. "That's insane. Barges are slow. They're exposed. The rebels will see them from miles away and hit them with mortar." Clara nodded. "Yes, if you send them during the day. But if you send them at night, using small, silent electric motors, and if you coordinate with local fishermen who know every bend and eddy of those rivers, you might get through. The rebels don't have night vision. They don't have radar. They have men with guns sitting around fires. A barge moving without lights, with no engine noise, is just a shadow on the water." Mrs. Diallo was writing fast now. The other advisors were whispering to each other. Even the general looked less certain. Clara continued. "But that's only half the plan. The other half is the source of the food. Right now, you're buying food from the capital and shipping it 1,000 miles. That's expensive and slow. But I looked at the agricultural reports for the northern districts of Kalo, the ones not controlled by the rebels. Farmers there have a surplus of maize and beans. They can't sell it because the rebels have blockaded the markets. So the food is just sitting in barns, rotting. If you buy that food locally, you don't have to ship it from the capital. You just move it a few miles to the river. That's faster, cheaper, and it puts money into the hands of local farmers who are loyal to the government. That weakens the rebels' support base." The president was smiling for the first time in weeks. "What about the mines on the roads?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Don't use the roads. Use the rivers for everything. But you need one more piece. You need someone on the ground in Gaeta who can organize the distribution when the food arrives. Someone the people trust. Someone who isn't military or government." She looked at the president. "There's a woman named Mama Hadija. She runs the largest mosque in Gaeta. She's not a rebel. She's not a politician, but everyone respects her. If she tells people where to line up for food, they will listen. Has anyone talked to her? The room was silent. No one had talked to Mama Khadija. They had been too busy sending soldiers and negotiating with rebels. The president turned to Mrs. Diallo. Give me a secure line to Mama Khadija today. Then he turned back to Clara. You've given us a plan. But plans fail. What's your backup? Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. I have 7 backups. Weather contingencies, rebel ambush contingencies, barge breakdown contingencies, and one final contingency that I hope we never use. She paused. If all else fails, I will go to Gaeta myself. I've been training for this. I can move through the bush at night. I know how to read the stars. I can defend myself. I can organize the people on the ground. But that's the last option. Let's try the first 6 first. The meeting lasted for more hours. By the end, the plan was no longer just Clara's idea. It belonged to the room. General Caputo, the same man who had laughed at her, was now arguing passionately for the river route. The intelligence chief was mapping rebel positions along the rivers. Mrs. Diallo was coordinating with local fishermen. And Clara sat quietly in her corner, taking notes, making small adjustments, and watching her plan come to life. No one wrote her off anymore. No one called her ineffective. They called her by her name, Clara, and sometimes, in whispers, they called her something else, the one who sees. The operation was called Silent Harvest. It took 2 weeks to prepare. Barges were modified with electric motors. Local fishermen were hired and trained. Food was bought from northern farmers and moved to hidden loading points along the rivers. And on a moonless night, the first barge pushed off from the bank without a sound. Clara was not on the barge. She was in the capital, in a small room with the president, watching a satellite feed and listening to radio chatter. The first barge reached Gaeta at 3 a.m. No rebels, no mines, no gunfire. The second barge followed. Then the third. By dawn, 20 barges had delivered enough food to feed the city for 2 weeks. Mama Khadija organized the distribution. People who had been eating leaves now had maize, beans, and cooking oil. They wept, they prayed, they thanked the president. But the president, sitting in that small room with Clara, knew who they should really thank. The rebels tried to respond. They sent fighters to the riverbanks, but the barges had already unloaded and returned. They tried to intimidate the fishermen, but the fishermen were armed now with radios and government support. They tried to spread rumors that the food was poisoned, but Mama Khadija herself ate the first bowl in public. The blockade was broken. Not by force of arms, but by a quiet woman who had been written off as ineffective until the president reached out to her while she was training. Clara never became famous. She never gave a speech or had a statue built in her honor. She went back to her data. But now, when she wrote a memo, people read it. And when she trained at 4 a.m., she knew that somewhere in the capital, the president was also awake, trusting the one who sees.